Welcome to the Motive for Life radio show. This is Robert Christensen. Thank you for joining me in this 2021 year in review wrap up. So many things that I want to cover today in this wrap up review. It's been a couple weeks since I've done a podcast, mostly because I've been doing courses and testing and just elevating my own education, and I didn't have time. And so I kind of let up on myself, and there's kind of this rhythm that you got to get into for podcasts and stuff like that, so it gets promoted on all the sites. And I said to myself, I'm just going to let that go and work at my own pace and put out content that I think is meaningful and relevant at the time that it happens. And stop worrying about how many downloads and stuff like that's going to happen. So you're feeling the result of that if you are a consistent listener. I appreciate you hanging out and still subscribing to the channel. But we're going to have a little more robust and in-depth conversations in 2022 than we have with just a consistent weekly podcast, and trying to come up with topics that I think are relevant for whatever's happening within that week. So with that said, let's get into 2021. 2021 was such an interesting year. So many things that have occurred. I look back on all the progress that all the students and the people who I coach and the loved ones and just everybody in my community that participates and thinks about elevating their self-worth and what that means to them. And for myself, the year started off very interesting. We were just coming in to the vaccination being available, coming into February or so. And so there was hope that the lockdown was going to get released, et cetera. And so I was consuming a lot of content, and I found a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vee is his name, and he produces all sorts of content all over the place. It's almost impossible to miss him. And I originally started listening to him because somebody referred me over to him as a possible means for me to elevate my own, podcast, my own marketing and that kind of stuff like that. And I was less interested in that, and I was more interested in with his message. And his messages are all about kindness and empathy and business acumen, meaning that you can get really, really good at business while having kindness, humility. Instead of trying to kill the other guy in competition, you cooperate. It's an abundant universe. He's really brought out a lot of super messages, I think, around participating in a kind and meaningful world while still competing. I love that message, right? So I consumed a lot of that. And while at the same time, one of the things that happened is he introduced me to the cryptocurrency world as well as NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And NFTs were just starting to break a little bit in February and March, and I was just learning about them. So I decided to follow his advice, and I put some money into some Ethereum, a cryptocurrency. I've never done that before. I had no idea about what I was doing, what a wallet was, or what a smart contract was going to be, so like that. So I just started consuming his information and really, really digging deep into cryptocurrency, blockchain, more specifically, smart contracts and smart contracts attached to NFTs. And I have to say, it's been a hell of a journey. I ended up buying one of his NFTs. It is called a Karma Kiwi. He introduced some couple hundred cartoon characters, his doodles, and each of the doodles were in various rarities, right? There might be 10 of the lowest one and only one of the highest one in each of the characters. And one of the characters was called Karma Kiwi. And I remember when they auctioned them off, I had no idea what I was doing, and I was risking a little bit of money. It was a couple $1,000s, and I was scared to death. It wasn't money that was meaningful enough that I would break me, and I'd probably get pissed if I lost it, for sure. But I talked with my wife and I said, hey, this is what I want to do. And she said, go for it. And so that turned out to be one of the best leaps of faith that I've ever made. That NFT just skyrocketed in value. And it also came with a 3-year pass to his show called VCon, and VCon will be in Minneapolis in May, and it allows you to go to the show. You can't buy your way into the show. You can't buy a ticket. You have to own one of these NFTs. And because of the NFT ownership, it has something called a smart contract associated with it, which allows me to have a physical ticket to go into the show. And I really love that whole idea, so I bought into it. So I fell all the way into Gary Vee and all of his teachings, and I highly, highly recommend that you do too. Try not to get hung up in his brashness and all of his loudness. His content is spectacular, and it changed how I look at social media, how I look at technology. It reinforces my belief system about how to do business. And what I'm going to really, really focus on in 2022, and how I'm going to change how I talk to you, how I'm going to coach you, how I want to really help you get to the next level of whatever it is that you're trying to do. And he has done a great deal for me in this year. And I wanted to just say thank you, Gary Vee. If you ever listen to the Motive for Life podcast, you changed my life. This is Robert Christensen, and I hope that you someday hear this. And I'd like to talk with you sometime. That'd be fun. All right. Hey, so the next thing that happened that I found was really interesting is when the COVID vaccinations were coming out and everybody was just initially getting vaccinated, in the county of Orange County here in Southern California, they called up all of the poll workers, people who do the voting and run the booths. And my wife had been a poll worker, and she runs polling stations now for many, many years. And they asked her if she would administer and help administer vaccinations. Now, she was pretty scared at first. She didn't know what to do and stuff like that, but she volunteered and went, and, they paid her a little bit of money, but the reality was it was long days, 10, 12-hour days, standing out in the cold, vaccinating people through their windows of their cars. And it was really scary. And she said about 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7 people would burst out crying as soon as they got their vaccination. And to see how she just felt like she was contributing to the well-being of everybody as she was able to help people get vaccinated through that process was game-changing, life-affirming. It just opened my eyes to the beauty and the giving of everybody that I know during this very difficult time, and how she just cares. And she put her own well-being ahead of the well-beings of others while she vaccinated people, and she worked with some nurses and the doctors and stuff and the protocols and stuff like that. And it was like 3 months of solid vaccination of what they call super cells here in Orange County, where they were vaccinating, I guess it was like 3,000 people a day, 5,000. It was a crazy number. There was hundreds of people that were outside in the rain, in the cold, vaccinating people outside. And my wife doesn't listen to my podcast, but I know she was just amazing. And there were so many other people involved with that, getting people vaccinated. And it was such a huge, huge bright spot in a very dim portion of the year here during that first part of the year. And so if you were part of that and you helped people during COVID and just tried to make a difference and were part of that whole solution, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being somebody who contributed to the welfare of our communities everywhere. And then, so next thing that happened, this was in March, mid-March, I launched a mastermind. It was a free mastermind coaching course. And there were 2 different groups. One was a all men group that was on Wednesday night. And then there was a co-ed group on Thursday night. The men's group got started earlier. It started in early March. And then the co-ed one got started in April. And each week, the context of these masterminds was to talk about elevating the self-worth of everybody on the call, and then applying techniques and lessons that I've learned over the years about elevating self-worth and putting that context into the group. It was free to anybody who brought anybody. There was no requirement. You just had to show up and have confidentiality, meaning that you couldn't repeat any of the things that you heard other people talking about. And the structure of the meeting, of the calls, they were an hour and a half long, and they started, at 7 p.m. and ran until 8:30. And it was a intro, and then we'd start with something called spiking the football. And spiking the football, if you're not familiar with American football, is when a player who scores a touchdown, they spike the ball, they hit it, they throw it onto the ground in an effort to cheer for themselves to celebrate. And so every meeting we started off with a what we call a safe zone to spike the football. And when you spike the football, you're in a space where you can take some pride in a success or win that you have done. And it was so illuminating how difficult it is for people to recognize that they had a win, that they had a success. And when they spiked the football and when they had a chance to have a success, it really shifted their context. They start feeling better. Everybody on the call would applaud and tell them, nice job. And that went on for about 5 or 10 minutes before the beginning of each meeting. And then we would go into the actual lesson. Well, I found that the spiking the football section was probably the most powerful part of that whole series. And those 2 courses ran for approximately 4 months. They were free. They were every Wednesday and Thursday nights. And they were fantastic. It was such a good exercise. And what I ended up doing was it had to prepare content and then present it each time, and make sure that it was something that was consistent and deliverable each week. There was a presentation deck, there were some slides, there were some exercises people had to do. And then we sent them off to take on some actions for that week, and then they come back. I received so many emails, notes, feedbacks, calls from people saying it changed their life. They was able to do something that they had never done before. They got a chance to level up. And when I mean by level up, they just took what that next goal was and moved up to the next one. Oh, and here was something we implemented as well, is at the beginning of every month, we would set 3 bold goals for that month. And we shortened up the time period about what the goals were, like if they wanted to save $1,000, or if they wanted to, get a promotion or start a new opportunity, or, just do something that was important for them that month, like lose 5 pounds. It was a really, really empowering process for me and for the rest of the team as well. It was such a good time. The next thing that happened, a series of things that happened throughout the year was all of my books that I consumed on Audible. I am challenged to actually pick up a book and read it. It's always been difficult for me, and I am a much better listener when I drive, those type of things. So I wanted to share with you my list of books that I consumed this year. The first one, which I thought was just amazing, was a book called Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Such a great book. It's a fiction book. I am not much on reading a lot of fiction. I'm mostly nonfiction, but this one my wife recommended to me, and I have to say it did not disappoint. It was fantastic. A more recent one was something called The Way of the Superior Man by David Dia, and that book was really pivotal in how I navigate my relationship with my wife, and just showing up as a guy, being a purposeful masculine man. And not so much in the role of me being male, but having a masculine present. I'm a masculine person. I have very little femininity in me, but I have a lot of masculinity in me, and I'm very, comfortable with that. And showing up as a guy in my life, in my businesses, in my life, my kids' life, et cetera. And how do I do that in a way that supports and is loving of a community, of my family, of supporting of my wife? All that stuff was really, really good. And I truly appreciated it. There's a new book out by by Robert Greene. He did the 48 Laws of Power, which I thought were just fantastic. The Daily Laws, which is a combination of all of his different books and writings and stuff that he distilled into a daily readings. And I thought that turned out really good. Louise Hay, I really love. She really got famous back in the 80s and 90s with a lot of her mirror work as well as her affirmations. And she's just fantastic. She started Hay House, which is a big publishing company. And she has one of her most famous books is what is called You Can Heal Your Life. The Audible version of that is fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it and that you consume it. The next one is by Stephen Fry, which was a mythology. Not mythology? I think that's right. It's called Heroes, but it's about Greek mythology and the heroes in Greek mythology and the messages and the mythology of the metaphors that they bring to life. And I thought it was fantastic. It was a great, great listen. It kind of stitched together all of these things that have carried down through history over thousands of years. Loved it, loved it, loved it. The next one is called Longitude by Dava Sobol, excuse me. And this book was amazing. It's a nonfiction, historical book around the discovery of how to track longitude back from, I could say, the 1600s all the way up through the late 1700s, and the discovery of a consistent and durable timepiece that allowed people to know where they are on the globe longitude. This was an amazing book. It's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. It's such a great story. Highly recommend it. There were a number of other ones. Oh man, there's so many of them like that. So I think the one that I liked a lot this year was Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama. It was such a good book. The Power of Ambition by Jim Rohn. That's a repeat for me. I thought that was super, super good. Cosmic Consciousness, Ken Wilber. I consumed a ton of Ken Wilber. He is very dense, not dense, mentally dense in his consumption. He's a high IQ guy, and I had to slow it down to take in a lot of his concepts, but they were really quite good. So he's got a number of them that I thought were amazing. Oh, and here's one. A couple more books I'll talk about, but The Greatest Salesman in the World by Augmentino. Great book. Oh my God, this is something I can't believe I didn't listen to earlier, but it's one of these books where you do these exercises at the end and you practice these mantras each month, and you come away with just having this amazing, amazing richness in your life. It's called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Augmentino. And then I'll leave you with this one. It was called Breathe. It's called Breath by James Nestor. James Nestor wrote this book about his history, trying to get some kind of solution to his nasal and his teeth problems, his dental problems, and he's having all sorts of challenges, infections, and just a massive amount of problems around his cranium. And he found that doing breath work, a specific type of breath work, really solved all of his problems. And it boiled down to this: nasal breathing. And I implemented a number of the nasal breathing techniques that are in that book, and fantastic. It changed my life. I have to say, I no longer exercise with my mouth hanging open. Even if I'm dying, I'm breathing through my nose and inhale and exhale. How I meditate, it just changed a lot of stuff. So I will go and put together a bunch of other ones. Oh, here was another one. Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. Let me tell you, Matthew McConaughey, he's a character. I love his brashness, his unapologetic behavior about who he is. Don't believe in half the shit he says, but that's fine. I do appreciate who he is. And he wrote a book called Green Lights. Wonderful book. Wonderful, wonderful book. Thought it was a great thing. It gave me an opportunity to really reflect on how I'm looking at my opportunities in life. And then another great book that obviously everybody should read or listen to is called The Call of the Wild by Jack London. I put that back into my repertoire and consumed that again, and had a fantastic, fantastic time listening to that. Boy, it just made me feel wonderful. Now, on to some other areas of my life, like health. I had come into March or April, and I think I'd put on about 12 or 14 extra pounds as a result of, I can blame it on COVID. How about that? Let's blame it on COVID. if there's anything going wrong in your life, you have now permission to go blame it on COVID. The reality is I just didn't care about what I was doing. I didn't seem to have any particular control over what I was eating or when I was eating. I just kind of just meandered along with it. So what I decided to do was change that. The gym that I used to go to had reopened, and I decided to go back. And I decided to get up at 5 a.m. consistently. I had been waking up early, but I was just laying in bed rolling around. And I decided to make it a habit, a discipline. And so I got up, started getting up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym regularly. I was able to and afford a trainer and just started changing everything. So 13 pounds later, I'm as strong as I've ever been in my life. And I have just physically, I feel fantastic. Many of the aches and pains that I had early on have disappeared. I'm able to do 3 or 4 pull-ups when I've never been able to do a pull-up in my life. Even my strongest part when I was a teenager, I never was able to do that. And so I just feel fantastic physically. And so I asked myself one day, I added up all the money I was spending on the trainer and the gym and stuff like that, and it was not a small amount. I said to myself, would I spend that money to feel like I feel like today? And that was a hell yes. That was like a hell yes. And more importantly, somebody else told me, he says, it's not just what you spend on the money to feel like what you are now, you're extending your life. And I went, really? He says, oh yeah, you probably tacked on another 3 or 4 years to your life just because you are making your heart stronger. Blood flow is cleaner. You have fewer toxins in your blood. All your organs are doing better. You're flexible, flowing. And I said, you're right. What would I pay to tack on 3 more years to my life? Wow, that totally changed how I looked at life, how I looked at spending money on my health. So I gladly pay the money to improve my physical well-being. And then lastly, I'm going to leave you with this. I ended up the year getting MBTI certified, which is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is a preference rating of one of 16 categories of preferences that you are. If you've taken an MBTI, you get a 4-letter acronym that defines what kind of person you are from a preferences point of view. It's a personality preference assessment. Okay. It's not a traits. It's not a measurement. It says, what do you prefer? And those preferences are measured by this scoring mechanism. So I decided to become certified in this area. The certification process was long. It was 4 days, all day long training in each day, and then followed by a fairly lengthy and detailed test that you had to get 80% on, which was appropriate. I passed that as well, and now I'm MBTI certified. And I love this combination of self-worth combined with preferences. And I think between the two of them, it's a wonderful combination of determining what people prefer and what gifts were they given at birth and those preferences, and then having the self-worth to let those preferences, to let those preferences be released into the wild and to stand with them. There's a lot of people, let me give you for example, there's a lot of people who prefer to be an introvert, but they feel that being an introvert is not a good thing and that they try to be an extrovert when they prefer not to be. Now, there's a lot of good stuff that people do when they're introverted, when they're alone, where they just have their quiet time and they don't want to socialize with a bunch of people. And they may often feel like they have to be an extrovert to participate. And I want to just let them know that that's not the case, that you can embrace being an introvert. You can embrace being somebody who does not have to socialize and go to all the parties and to stand up and to be a public speaker. None of that has to happen. when you have higher self-worth, when you raise your worthiness to the level that says, I embrace all my preferences, I embrace all the things about me as good, that I was born this way. This is exactly what was meant to be and what it is that I want to be. And then I can find my path in any situation, personal or professional, community or family, any place that my preferences are of an asset. And when you do that, when you lean into your preferences and you know what your preferences are, then you can decide where is the best place where my preferences should show up. One of the exercises we did in the course, which I thought was really interesting, was to assemble a team and then have a leader who has a set of preferences and then allow that leader to shape us into a team where that we can work well together. And the leader said something very interesting. He said, I want you folks to try to lean into the preferences that are not your preferences. I want you to lean, if you're an extrovert, I want you to lean into more introvert. If you're someone who does a more sensing versus an intuition person, I want you to be a more intuition person. And I said straight up, I'd quit this job. And they were taken back. And I said, why would I change what I prefer so that you could stretch me into an area I don't want to be in? Now, no one in the group had even considered that perhaps we should pair people up with opposites preferences and team those people up, an introvert with an extrovert, someone who does sensing and someone who does intuition. In putting these two people together and allowing for their gifts to be complemented in polarity and creating balance through a team. And the individual was very taken back by my comment. And I said, I'm not going to spend my time in jobs that I do not like trying to change how I feel for the benefit of the leader. If the leader is not plugged into what the team's balance and dynamics need to be, I don't want to be part of that team. And so it really shook us up a little bit. It changed how the leader thought about things. He was very grateful for the conversation. And what it has done for me, and has done for me for many, many, many years, is that I don't take jobs that I don't fit. This was at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that comes out of MBTI is the identification of where I fit into the world and what it is that I can bring to it with my gifts and be proud of having those gifts. This is the big aha for 2021 for me, is that I am a extroverted, intuitive, judgment, and perceiving individual. It is an ENTJ. An E stands for extroversion. An N stands for intuition. The T stands for thinking versus feeling. And the P stands for perception or perceiving. Now, it turns out that I'm almost an equal balanced person when it comes to thinking and feeling, meaning that I will make tough decisions, but I'm very compassionate while I do it. And because of these preferences and the way that I've navigated my career, I've been able to land into positions and jobs that really fit me because I just own my preferences. You may have a different set of, you obviously should have a different set of them. Turns out that my set of preferences is like a 3% of all of the people that take the courses, that take the assessments, have the one that I have. But there's a lot of different things and a lot of different seats on the bus. How you show up, how you decide to engage your preferences is completely up to you. I encourage you to find somebody. You can email me at robert@motiveforlife.com. I'd be more than happy to put you through and get you set up with an assessment on MBTI and walk you through it. So anyway, I really believe that 2021 has been a great year. I want to say thank you for everybody who's joined me on this trip. And look for a completely different set of topics and directions that we're going to go for in 2022. We're going to pivot into coaching, meaning that we're going to pivot into assembling and building out Motive for Life with a coaching staff. I said it, there it is. I want to build at this time next year, January 1st, 2023, Motive for Life will have a series of coaches. They'll be trained and certified in self-worth. And I'm really, really active and interested in talking to anybody who wants to participate in that service. Talk to you then, folks. I love you, and I'll see you again in 2022. Bye. This has been a Motive for Life Productions. All rights reserved.